Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Gird Up podcast. My name is Charlie Ungemach. Very excited that you're with us today. We've got an interview scheduled, but before we get to that, we'd like to invite you to help support the work that we're doing here at Gird Up. And you can do so by making a cup of coffee donation. We call it a cup of coffee donation because for the price of a cup of coffee, you can help support the ministry we're doing here at Gird Up as we flood the internet with confessional content and help prepare the people of God for whatever lies ahead. So if you'd like to support the work that we're doing here, all of it's free to anybody that wants to listen to it worldwide, and we want to keep it that way. So if you'd like to help support the work that we're doing here, go down in the show notes below and click on the link to the website, or just type in www.girdupministries.com. Select Buy Us a Cup of Coffee in the main menu, or scroll down to the bottom and click Make a Donation, and you can make a donation right there. All of our fancy microphones and cameras and lights and things are the result of you guys. And when I arrive down south for Vicar Year here in a few weeks, the studio setup entirely will be funded by you guys. So thank you very much for the ways that you supported the work that we're doing here. Our guest today is Dan Van Voorhis, I suppose, pastor, professor, scholar, Dan Van Voorhis. What do you go by generally?
Usually I go by Dan. I have spent most of my life as a teacher of some sort. So professor and teacher is great.
Awesome. Now, Dan, you've got a couple of different podcast projects going on. That's how I came across you. You want to just give us a picture of what your life looks like at the moment, the kind of
Sure.
things that you're doing?
I've been podcasting since 2013, and so what's that? 12 years now. So 2013, I started teaching full time in 2006, and so full time professor in 2013 decided that podcasting was kind of the next way to get information out. I went to grad school, and that was, you write the journal article, or, you submit the peer reviewed thing, and that's fantastic stuff. But I was really busy and with the full teaching sort of load, and decided with a colleague to start a podcast, and that podcast kind of took off. And as that podcast took off, and I was teaching at Concordia University out in Irvine, an organization called 1517 was starting out of the church that I was attending at the time. And these were people, this one church, I think there were like 7 or 8 profs from Concordia. We all went there. I was in charge of Sunday school and having profs come in and teach Sunday school, and we were videotaping it, and it was going pretty well. And at the same time, some people there thought, hey, let's get this out of our little church and out of just the university and get it to everybody. And so 1517 kind of was starting then. I left Concordia to come to 1517. My old podcast ended, and I started the podcast I've been doing since 2019, which is called the Christian History Almanac. Essentially, it is a daily on this day podcast where I tell you a little bit about our collective past and finish with a scripture reading and a benediction. And we just surpassed our 2000th episode. And so we are just plugging along. So Christian History Almanac at 1517.org. That's where I spend my time these days, and it's worthwhile.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate the fact that you put it together. I was telling you before we got on air here that I've been listening to it pretty much daily throughout my time at the seminary for a couple of different reasons. One is it's about 7 minutes long, and it takes about 7 minutes for me to get dressed in the morning. So there's just the right amount of time for me to listen to something in the morning. 2, you always make me look good in church history class because our Professor Otto always starts with Today in Church History, and almost every day, not every day, but almost every day, I know something that's on the board already, and maybe know a detail or two that he doesn't, which makes me feel good. Probably, I bet he gets annoyed by it, but I don't really care.
Nice.
Hey, every seminarian needs to show off somehow, right? It's in our nature. You gotta flex your muscles.
And I found in the world of podcasting that there are so many podcasts. And I was just trying to find my niche. And I thought, you know what, if I can do just a short daily just something short. And as you know, going short sometimes is harder than going long. And to sit down and say, okay, what do I need to say? How am I going to say it? And to do that. So the little daily podcast kind of just fit right in. And we've loved it. Once again, you earlier said we, referring to the whole organization. I say we oftentimes when 1517 is certainly a we. The almanac is me and our audio producer who is out there in Wisconsin, out there in Random Lake, Wisconsin. So
Random Lake. It's a pretty area up there. All right. Well, the third reason I've got to listen to you every morning is because I've got two roommates this last school year who don't like to get out of bed on time. And so if I can boom something through the speakers that is both annoying to them and also is going to help them learn something, get them focused for the day. There we go. It's perfect. It's perfect. So you've got a very unique signature sign off on on a brief history, or no, not a brief history. Sorry, Christian History Almanac. Getting them all.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Yeah. On the almanac, you've got a very unique sign off. I imagine that's not something you just thought of one day. Maybe it is, but I'm curious how that evolved to be what it is now, and why you chose that to be your sign off every day.
Sure. Yeah, this is the question I get asked probably as much as any question. And there are a couple different things. So at the end of every show, I give you the sort of on this day, and then I do a reading from the daily lectionary. I pick part of the daily lectionary, I read that, and then I do a sign off. And at the end, as a bit of Bach is playing, I say the rumors of grace, forgiveness, and the redemption of all things are true. Everything is going to be okay. And that comes from a couple different places. So when I was a college student, I used to drive to school, and on the way to school, I would listen to my local NPR station, and there was a small program called the Writer's Almanac with a guy named Garrison Keillor, who many people know as the Prairie Home Companion. And he did this daily show that was about 5 minutes long, and it was him doing on this day using a writer from history. And then he would read a poem, and then he would sign off with a little sort of have a nice day. And I would listen to this every morning as I was driving to school. And I remember thinking, man, what a job. This guy just gets to learn history and talk about history and then tell us a little bit of it and tell us to have a good day. And so, I mean, that's like 1999. So it's 20 years before my show starts. I'm listening to that religiously. And I loved the sign off that he had. So then when it came to do my own show, I wanted to write my own sign off, something that was a little more than just have a good day, because we have better news than have a good day as Christians. And so I took two things. One was a sign off on my old show. So from 2013 to 2019, I did a show called Virtue in the Wasteland. That show was part of 1517. And probably back in about 2014 or 15, I was doing a show with my old partner, and we were doing it on hope. And it just so happens that as we were doing this show on hope, we were both, for various reasons, depressed. And, so we're talking to each other about hope, and we have to wrap the show up. And at the end, almost sort of mockingly, I said, well, whatever, everything's going to be okay. As kind of like, isn't that the most cliche, dumb thing you can say? And the show ended, and I just kind of, it sat with me weird. And I talked to my partner, and we were talking about it, my broadcasting partner there. And although I said it, and then we said it kind of in jest, I realized that's actually the best news anyone can hear. That everything is going to be okay is ultimately true in Jesus. And ultimately, there's nothing better that is distilling ultimately the best news. And so I was reminded of a guy named Peter Berger, was a sociologist out of the University of Chicago. And he wrote a book called The Rumor of Angels. And the rumor of angels is this idea that we're all secretly spiritual and religious in some way. And what we really want is what the infant who wakes up in a storm wants, which is a mother holding them saying everything is going to be okay. There's something hardwired into us that we need to hear this. Well, just because we need to hear this doesn't mean we get to hear this. But what if I told you that the rumors of angels, or the rumors of grace and forgiveness and the redemption of all, what if that was true in Jesus? Then we could say everything is going to be okay. So I sat with a notepad sometime in early 2019, took the everything's going to be okay, the other part, said it, and have said it now over 2,000 times on a daily basis. Would have no idea that that would be my legacy, that people would come up to me and say, I need to hear that, or would you say that? And it's a reflection of the good news of the gospel. And if I accept it as that, then I'll accept it as praise, as often as people want to give it.
Yeah, love it. I have a confession to make. I have stolen your catchphrase.
Great.
In my in my work at the seminary. So while I'm at the seminary, I'm working for an organization called Truth and Love Ministries, or ministry, not ministries. It's not plural. The plural one had some controversy a couple of years ago. It's not associated at all. Anyway, so it's an organization that specifically is tasked with bringing the gospel to Mormons, and I think it's particularly fitting. That phrase is particularly fitting for a group of people like that, where they legitimately have heard these rumors that there is something other than, because most of the people we talk to are either so entrenched in the LDS faith that they are all guns blazing, on fire for the LDS, or they are doubting and they're questioning and they're seeking something else, right? They're looking for something else. And those who have begun to doubt the veracity of their faith, or the truth of their faith, and are seeking something else and come to find us there, I've heard rumors that there might be some certainty that I don't have. Somebody else has certainty and I don't have it. And so I've said that a couple of different times, where somebody basically says, like, that's just too good to be true. Or what a terrible way to think of yourself. Like, you're bad, you can't do any good, and you're completely dependent on somebody else to be good for you. Like, that's an awful thing to say about yourself. It's like, yeah, that is an awful thing to say about myself, but it is true. There's also more to the story that's also true. And basically stolen your catchphrase.
Great.
Or not your
and
catchphrase.
it's just provocative enough that it gets someone to say, what really? How either they're incredulous and they say that can't be true, or they like Nicodemus, they want to come at night and ask more, sort of what's that all about? And it's a great place to be. So yeah, it's been fun that just a little tagline at the end of a show. You said earlier something about wanting people to listen through to the end of a podcast, and if people who do podcast or video, numbers and stats know that listening to the end is a really big thing. You want to show that people listen to the end. So when you have a nice benediction that people want to listen to, and you tag that at the end, that certainly helps. So I'm happy to have that for the numbers.
Yeah. And rationally speaking, it is too good to be true, right? Like it is too good to be true. That's why we got to believe it.
So, absolutely.
Wonderful. All right. I am fascinated by, I love listening to your show because I don't know most of the people you're talking about, frankly. So some of these questions are going to be questions I'm sure you field. I know that you fielded the question I just asked 1,000 times.
Oh, happy
but
to
I got to ask it anyway, right? And some of these are probably going to be questions you've heard before also, but I'm going to nerd out a little bit on the podcast side of things. And I really want to get in on the, why it's important to study church history as well. So we're going to kind of explore those two trails and chase some rabbit holes as we go. You have somebody new to talk about every day. Like, I'm sure you have a whiteboard somewhere with some names on it of people you want to talk about.
I do. Right on the
2,000 episodes. 2,000 episodes is a lot of episodes. And I know that those aren't all necessarily like unique individuals, but it's pretty close to being 2,000 unique individuals. So how do you come up with all these names? Is it just from your personal study? Where do you get all these names from?
When I started the show on May 1st, 2019, the plan was we'll do it for a year and then we'll see what happens. And after 1 year, I thought, okay, I think I can do one more year. And then after one more year, I think that's when I realized, I could do this for 50 years. There are so many people. There are so many stories. And the fun thing about doing a short podcast is it's not exhaustive. So I've done shows on Luther, but there'll be more shows on Luther because there's more to talk about. There'll be more shows on Augustine and Aquinas and, various aspects. So there is a little bit of overlap. I have probably 16 or 17 websites that all do the kind of on this day format, from Christian perspectives to secular perspectives. I have a little tab thing, and anytime I want, I can just hit open and 16 tabs open, and I can just click in March 11th or whatever. So that's an easy sort of starting point. Is there a consensus of something that's happening on this day? I have the sort of Lutheran service book, the Anglican service book, the Presbyterian service book, the Roman Catholic Missal, that all have on this dates. So I just collect every denomination and every group that wants to do an on this day thing. I have those resources. So that's kind of my ground. Then as I'm doing my reading, I'll come across somebody and I'll think, I haven't done a show on that. Or at this point in the show, I get a lot of emails, or my father-in-law just texted me this morning, hey, do you know about this person? And so I'm constantly getting sort of people saying, how about this person? How about this person? So then I write them down. And then when there's a person, then I can put their name. I mean, one of the great things is probably half or just almost most of my library is digital in a way that it used to not be. And the great thing about a digital library is Control F. You give me a name, I can go through 10 books real fast and see what they all have to say. And if they have any dates associated, and if they do, then I go to my date book and I write them in. So after that, it becomes sort of this long process, but I've joked about being like the widow and Elijah with the oil. I just keep there it is. What am I going to do this weekend? Well, there it is. And so, there's always something, and it's been super enjoyable. There are times where I get a little panicked where I can't find something, but those are pretty few and far between. And there's always something fun.
Yeah. What, I'm sure there's more than one answer to this, but which characters from church history have you had the most enjoyment in studying?
All right. So the first two answers that I just pop right to my head. The first is a figure by the name of Johann Arndt. Johann Arndt was a Lutheran.
Like ARNDT?
Yep, ARNDT, 1555 to 1621. And he is the guy that ultimately I did my PhD dissertation on because I found him that interesting. I was going into to history, so my PhD is from the University of St. Andrews. My undergrad is in theology. I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I thought, well, if I get a degree in history, that will open up teaching and I can go back to theology. So anyways, I go into history, but I know that the history I want to do is going to be tied to theology. So I get into a department of history. They don't want anything more on Luther or the Reformation, right? It's been done to death. They're saying if you're a young PhD student, you need to do something else. And Johann Arndt was this fascinating character for me because he's part of this second generation of Lutherans, right? So his dates are 1555 to 1621. So he's born the year of the Peace of Augsburg. He's born 9 years after Luther's dead. And he's part of this generation that has to figure out what do we do next? And he's going to be struggling with the conversations in the 1570s about the Book of Concord and confessions. And he wants to blend the best of the confessions and Luther and he gets ostracized for it, and maybe for good reason. Maybe his language isn't always as precise as it could be. But he's this kind of middle ground character who's trying to live in a place where he's not quite comfortable. And there's probably some, autobiographical stuff going on there, but I really dig that. And I like seeing how he maneuvers that territory. So Johann Arndt is a fascinating guy. Now, Johann Arndt was the pastor to a young Johann Gerhard. And Lutherans might be familiar with Johann Gerhard as this other Lutheran who's trying to blend sort of the affective side of the faith, right? That emotions aren't a bad thing necessarily, with a sort of confessional, sort of purity. So Arndt and Gerhard are sort of my guys in the sort of late post-Reformation era that I always point to. And then the other person who I'm endlessly fascinated with was a woman from my neck of the woods named Sister Amy Semple McPherson, who was a sort of charismatic preacher back in the 1920s and 30s out here in Los Angeles. Tragic character. I don't agree with her on most things, but I do think she also was trying to figure out how to be a Christian and a celebrity, and how to do it in Hollywood in the 20s and 30s. And so, yeah, Amy Semple McPherson and Johann Arndt are always sort of the two I go to. At the same time, if you ask me any era, I could probably pull out characters, but they're going to be sort of these weird sort of characters who don't quite fit in.
In an interesting way, that answer really covers the spectrum of what you do on the almanac, right? There is a massive wealth of Lutheran theologians and Lutherans you could talk about, and apostolic fathers and so forth. And this is anecdotal, but in my experience, most Lutheran, whether they're professors or podcasters or whatever it is that are going to do history, kind of settle on those two eras, right? The apostolic era, and then Lutherans from Luther through today. And we don't really mess with everybody else. And sometimes it even kind of gets lost a little bit, but you've chosen to pull from all, like, American church history, from European church history, even in the modern era, all over the place. Like, nobody's off limits to you. Why have you chosen to take such a wide spectrum? And why? Because you mentioned with McPherson, you don't agree with pretty much anything she says, and yet she's a fascination for you and someone whose story you've chosen to tell. So why do you choose to tell the stories of those who you can argue about, like, how much of a benefit they even were to the church necessarily? I know it's a bold thing to say, but
sure. No, I hear you. I take great solace in the bigness of the church throughout time and space. When it comes to where you're going to worship on a Sunday morning, I understand, pulpit and altar issues. And I understand saying, okay, when it comes to the Lord's Day, here's how I worship. But that doesn't mean that the rest of the worshiping Christian world isn't Christian, that they aren't our cousins, that they aren't part of God's plan, even if I don't completely understand it. God, why would you make an Amy Semple McPherson when you could simply make another one of so-and-sos that I like? Well, because this is the way it is. And we live in a strange world with a big church with all kinds of characters that I don't always agree with. And at the end of the day, that has come to really give me comfort, that the church is so big that there's room for me, there's room for them. And in a way that I wasn't expecting, doing this show has made me more gracious in my own Christian life, because I don't have to agree with him. But for instance, I spent years living in Scotland. And if you talk to someone who's lived in Europe, and you talk about the church situation and where did you go to church and could you find other Christians, one of the things I heard over and over was, if you find someone else who can affirm the bodily resurrection of Jesus, man, they are your brother. They are your sister, because you're living in a world where it's hard to find anybody. We're blessed that in America at this state that we're not there yet. But there is something to realizing, churches, it's really big, and that's good news. And it also means I've got to be a little bit more gracious, because we're all so different. We're all bound to be wrong in some place. And so, I think it can be helpful. So the big picture is comforting, and it's fun because, listen, I'm not going to name other podcasts, but there's some history podcasts and they just do the same names over and over. And isn't it fun to learn new names? Isn't it fun to, I think it's yesterday's show is a man by the name of Kai Gao, first man baptized by a Protestant missionary in China. And today's show is Radu Das, the seventh man baptized in India as a Christian. And both of these shows, Kai Gao and Radu Das, I spent way more time on those shows than I normally do, because 19th century Chinese and Indian history isn't what I did. But I had so much fun spending hours and hours reading into and the backgrounds and who are they. And so the variety, I think, makes it fun.
Yeah. While you were talking, I couldn't help but think a little bit about the creeds, right? There's a reason that we confess the creeds and not like the Luther's writings or the Augsburg Confession or something like that after our sermons, because we're confessing a common faith with all Christians of every generation and every place and every race and every creed and so forth. Even if they aren't necessarily Lutheran, or I shouldn't say necessarily Lutheran. I don't know why I'm being hesitant about that. Even if they're not, even if they wouldn't necessarily even worship with us, we're still confessing a common faith. And I like that you pointed out, these are my brothers and sisters, regardless of whether or not we are in agreement on everything that we teach and preach. And we should. It's wise to organize ourselves with people that are like-minded on these things, but that doesn't mean we're going to be, segregated
I
in
like
heaven either.
My show does for people who are concerned about altar and table fellowship. And I understand that, hey, I worship here, I worship with these people, but that doesn't mean I need to remain ignorant or not know about what else is happening in the church and other people. And this doesn't mean that I need to sit down and give them the right hand of fellowship, and worship with them. But it for me, it's just fun. It's fun it's like going to the zoo, like, who's here? What different types do we have? It's fun.
Speaking specifically of American Christianity, American Christianity in general is so different than the story that is like Lutheranism, and especially Lutheranism in America. I mean, when you think about like the LCMS comes over and is basically an established church already when they get here, right? The first thing they do is set up a seminary when they arrive on the plains. And then the same thing, like Wisconsin Synod and the Norwegian Synods and so forth, it's a little different, but they're already established churches bringing over, their own ministers and things, which is not really the case for most of American Christianity. What's the value, do you think, we're not real familiar, I think, as lay people in general, we're not real familiar with our own history, much less the history of other church bodies, especially in the United States. What would the value be of being more familiar with some of those storylines?
Oh, man. I mean, one, there's a level of just self-understanding and self-exploration that happens when you start to look at other people and how other people do things with an open hand, and it can help reinforce who you are. Oh, I see why they do that and why we don't do that. Or, oh, could we do that? Oh, no, why not? Well, here's why. So there's just an element of exploring how other people do things that lead naturally to questions about who we are and why we do what we do. So I always think, yeah, getting out there, looking at the bigger picture, seeing how other people are doing it, a general curiosity is just a helpful thing. It's just a good thing for anybody, let alone a Christian. A couple things in terms of just knowing, back when I was the department chair of the School of History, I was the guy that had to write up all the stuff for the website and the syllabus and why should you study history and why should you come to this school. That was what I would do. And one of the quotes that I stole was from a man named Matthew Arnold. And Matthew Arnold wrote that in studying history and getting the long view of things, we are able to see life steadily and to see it whole. And that phrase just kind of rolled around in my head and always has rolled around in my head, that when we study history, when we look at the long view, when we look at everyone, it allows us to see life steadily and to see it whole. And I think there's, not only is that intellectually satisfying, but it leads to humility and appropriate confidence and self-understanding. Be proud of who you are and understand how you fit into the bigger picture.
Yeah, you got a beautiful way of speaking about this, man. I know you said you stole that quote, but you just have a beautiful way of talking about this stuff. I love it.
I mean, this is, I just turned, I turned 46 this year. And so I'm hitting this sort of middle age, like, oh, wow, I've been doing this now for 27 years. And yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah, you talk about knowing broadly kind of where we stand. This is one of the questions that I shot to you, and it's a question as a guy prepare. I mean, especially as a second career guy, who's had the opportunity to do other things before I came to seminary and prepare to be a pastor. I get the question a lot: why be a pastor, and specifically why be Lutheran? And so I'm particularly, I don't want to say passionate, but enthusiastic about that question. I have my own answer to this question, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say, and you have a far more educated take on this anyway. What place does the Lutheran Church, especially confessional Lutheran churches, play in society today, in the world today? Why is it important that the Lutheran Church continues to exist?
Okay, so let's look at our situation. Let's narrow it down to the modern Western Church. So modern Western Church, this is us here in America, North America, post-Reformation. And when it comes to the available churches, you really have three options post-Reformation. You have the Catholic option, you have the Reformed option, and you have the Radical option. These are really the three branches that we see sort of come out of the Reformation. The Catholic option says we are going to build internally, and we are going to base ourselves on our authoritative sources, whether that be the councils, whether that be the Pope. We are internally building based on our authority. All right. Then you have the Reformed. And the Reformed, who in many cases didn't have the support of princes or kings, had to do things through consensus. They had to build consensus. They had to share regional confessions. You talk about the Lutheran confessions, and that's so handy because it's all in one book, and we can squabble over, should this be there or that be there. But if you look at the Reformed confessions, every country has its own confession. And then they had to build the sort of consensus based on regional preferences. And then you have the radicals, right? And the radicals are the ones who are going to say, institution be damned, we've got a saving message that we need to get out now. All right, so we've got the Catholic, where it's internal and it's the institution. We have the Reformed, where it's consensus building. And then we have the Radical that says, damn the torpedoes, I got a message, and we're going to break the walls if we need to. Where do the Lutherans fit? See, I love this question because the Lutherans can, in a way, fit all three of those categories. The Reformation, Luther's first shot, is as radical as it gets, saying, institution be damned. If anything gets in the way of this good news, I'm going to break down the wall. There is an element of consensus building amongst especially Christians and Lutherans in the West today. I know where you are out in Wisconsin. For like the past 5 years, I don't know what it is about the Scandinavian Lutherans in Minnesota, but they have been calling me out like every year. I've been going out and visiting the Scandinavian Lutherans, who I am not a Scandinavian Lutheran, nor am I Scandinavian, and we just get along. Maybe it's our love of Culver's or something. Or what did they teach me? A lefse. They taught me how to make lefse last time.
Fishy goop is what it is.
We have to deal with this sort of consensus building and different groups, whether they be Norwegian or American or Germanic. And then there's that Catholic option as well, which is, hey, we've got an institution, we've got an authority, and we are going to stay, and we're going to stay steady, and we're going to invite you to come join us. But we're not breaking out of this wall because we have this thing that we're quite comfortable with. So I like to ask individual Lutherans, where do you see your church? Or how do you understand Lutheranism? And this, I love this for pastors. I love this for lay people. And they're all going to say, well, I think we're probably closer to Catholic, or, oh no, we're definitely more radical. And watching people do that and realize, oh, there's actually a place for all three. And I think that in many ways is the beauty of the Lutheran option, is that it does give you a way to play in all three places.
Okay. So I'm about to head down south to the Bible Belt,
Yes.
to a place where there's not a lot of Lutherans.
Yes.
And I'm going to be asked the question, what does it mean to be Lutheran? Tell me what the Lutheran Church is. How would you answer that question?
So at 1517, we, started out in, I think about 2012 to 2013, and, trying to figure out how we're going to market ourselves. And 1517 made sense because that's sort of gets people asking the question, and we can tie it to the Reformation. And as we got bigger and bigger, we realized that the Lutheran world is a very small part of the larger Christian world. And at 1517, what we wanted to do, because we're not a church, is to have these things, these beautiful gifts of the gospel. And we want to say, like the guy at Costco with the little free trials, here, try some of this. Here, try some of that. Take this back home and see if it if the rest of your tribe likes it. What we found was that for many, Lutheran was foreign, and you might as well say Catholic. Lutheran and Catholic is just these like weird culty. I think they dress up for church. And I mean, dress up like, frilly stuff and light candles. And in the South, that's scary, right? There's still a kind of anti-Catholicism in the South, which then gets the Lutheran because they, they look the same. So in 1517, one of our first taglines was, "We are the first evangelicals." And and which is true, right? This is what Luther wanted to be called. The bearers of the gospel, the good news people. And so I find with especially my evangelical friends, when I say, "Oh no, we're evangelical," they say, "Oh no, yeah, oh no, oh yeah, no." There's the conversation, and then that gets into a conversation, and it stresses some continuity, while we can then make the lines of discontinuity and say, "Well, here's where it's different." But I think leaning into continuity before discontinuity with fellow Christians in our current state, oftentimes is a good way to go.
Yeah. How would you then how then do you define evangelical in that conversation, right? So you say, we're the first evangelicals. How do you then explain that to them?
So an evangelical is just a gospel person, a gospeler, a good news person, a person who stresses the good news of Jesus for sinners. But we're not going to get into church hierarchy first. We're not going to get into predestination first. We're not going to get into politics first. We're going to get into Jesus crucified for sinners and resurrected and glorified for our justification. That's what makes a good news person. Now, um, the modern definition of an evangelical, what is it? Oh heavens, the blank quadrilateral, not Tewksbury, but it's an Englishman, and he did work and said there are essentially four things that make an evangelical, and it's that they are sort of cross-centered, that they are interested in activism, which oftentimes in our generation meant kind of like pro-life activism, and conversionism. So when were you converted, right? That's sort of a modern evangelical thing. And the distinction with Lutheran evangelicalism is, I've described it before as a sacramental evangelicalism. So same good news, same message. How do I apply it to myself? Well, here's the trick. The sacraments. And instead of when were you saved? Well, it was when I was at the Billy Graham thing and I said the sinner's prayer. Well, I can go to my baptism. How do I know I'm saved? I receive the body and blood of my Lord Jesus Christ in faith and believe that that forgives my sins. And so there's just this added element. So a sacramental evangelical, especially to non-Lutherans or non-high church folk, that's kind of how I think the best. And evangelicals will get freaked out with sacraments. And one of the ways I've explained it before is this is like there are mystical aspects to our worship. And I'll ask someone, do you ever maybe close your eyes and raise your hand when you sing? Gotcha. Okay, you do. Because you're understanding there's something happening. There's something going on. I've got that too. It's tied to something. But once again, it's right. I'm trying to build some levels of continuity. Oh, we kind of do it like that. And here's how we fill it out. And that's, if nothing else, it makes for, I think, more fruitful conversation between, Christians who might otherwise just quarrel.
Yeah. To that point, why do you think it is that I'm sure there's a historical answer to this. That's why I'm asking you. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that they're so willing to accept like the mysticism, or to go down the mystic path, the mysticism path, like with hand raising and talking about this? And sometimes, we're seeing a resurgence even of speaking in tongues and things among evangelical churches. They're willing to embrace that side of the mysticism, but they're not with the physical elements and like the efficacy of the sacraments. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think we're all mystics by nature, for good and for ill. We aren't, we understand that there's more to this world than just, flesh and bone. So whenever I see mystic impulses, in people who want to, and whether this is secular, right, crystals and seances, or broadly evangelical with the mood music, right, and the getting the feeling right, or whether it's super high church and it's in the context of, a baptism or the Lord's Supper. I get it. That's because this is who we are. We're spiritual people. I think sometimes that spiritualism of the middle kind. So what will we call it? I'll call it broadly evangelical mysticism, or a mysticism. Let's do this. A mysticism without means, right? So I would say there's a sacramental mysticism and a mysticism without means. A mysticism without means is great for that person who doesn't trust authority, who doesn't want to go to the man to get the thing. And coming out of the Reformation, we should understand that, right? That's that radical part of the Reformation heritage where we're like, yeah, you're right. Do I really have to go to the man to get that thing? Why can't I just do communion at home? Like all these conversations that were happening over COVID. So I get the impulse there. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from. It's just a good old Western distrust of authority. So we're still going to be mystic, but we're going to do it without means, because that means we don't have to go to the man to experience it. And I get it, but I'd like to offer a middle way, which is a mysticism with means. And that's, I think that's a good Reformation Lutheran answer.
One could say the narrow Lutheran middle, right?
There you go.
If we got to coin our own term that no one's ever used before, Awesome. You've dived into the lives of so many different church history figures. I'm curious, has there ever been one that you wanted to talk about, or that was like that piqued your interest, and you either, I don't want to say didn't have the courage to talk about, but decided against? Has there ever been somebody that you're like, nah, I'm not going to touch that one?
Oh, yes, of course. And some I have hit just recently. So there are certain characters. So I had not done a show until just recently on Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards, the great American Enlightenment Puritan, the first Great Awakening, sinners in the hands of an angry God. He is a character who is beloved by a certain subsection of Christians that if you say something wrong, like they are going to come at you. He has, I mean, I'll say, so the past like 3 days on the Almanac, I got into something and I made a joke at the end of the show. I usually do a terrible pun or something at the end of the show. And I made a Lord of the Rings reference, and I don't know Lord of the Rings very well. And I messed up like Lord Deothen and Theodore or something. I don't know. So
it would almost be better to mess up doctrine than to mess up Lord of the Rings.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the emails just start flooding in. Like so then I make another joke about, well, if the eagles could get the little hobbits out, how come the eagles couldn't just fly them in? Don't do that, friends, because so like Lord of the Rings people, Jonathan Edwards people, and Jonathan Edwards was a slave owner. And I got to deal with that. It's sort of like, a lot of times people are like, oh, are you afraid to talk about Luther's anti-Semitism? No, not at all. Because he himself would have said he's a sinner. And that stuff's gross and we should condemn it. And on that side of eternity, he's condemning it too. But there are some characters who have such a cult following that to say anything against them is to invite, all kinds of attacks. So Edwards was one that I didn't do for a while, but I did recently. There's one I've not done yet because I don't know what to do with him. And that is a guy named Robert Farrar Capon. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's an Anglican priest who's also a chef who people love. And he understands grace, but his understanding of grace came on account of some really dark, deep, bad times. And I struggle with that, right? I struggle with like, how much do we, sort of almost glorify the bad sometimes to talk about the good. And we want to balance that. So the other thing is, boy, my audience is so broad, and I've probably never spoken to so many children at once, unknowingly, because there are so many kids in their parents' cars. And that makes me talk differently. Even words that I would say in regular, company, I don't say. I don't want to, I don't want someone to say, "Mommy, what's that word?" And then there's going to be a conversation. So, I do edit myself, and but it's part of the growing process, and some of these characters I'll get around to, but it just takes some maturity. There are characters sometimes I get so angry about that I have to put them down because I can tell that my script is getting snarky, and I have to say, "No, it's not fair. All right, let's put them down, pick up something else, come back, and I'm in a better mood." So,
yeah. Is there a figure from church? Ooh, here's a better way to ask that question. Is there a figure you've discovered in church history where you've thought, like, man, I wish this guy was my pastor?
Oh, heavens. I will tell you, that is something that has struck me over the years, my appreciation for pastors. And I should say for pastors being pastors. That is not pastors being celebrities, not pastors being political figures, not pastors be, that all these things that oftentimes pastors can kind of, get a little bit of the publicity bug or get a little bit of the attention bug, and they start, and it's those. I mean, I'm trying, who. I was just reading on Bugenhagen, Luther's pastor there in Wittenberg. We don't know a lot about. I mean, we know a bit about him, but not as much as we do other characters. But he's a fascinating guy because as the world is set on fire and seemingly then falling apart, he just has to be there at the Marienkirche, just faithfully preaching and hearing confession. And whether it's Melanchthon or Luther or Cranach or anybody else in that circle, he's the one who has to continue to feed his flock and doesn't get the name as much. There's what is that? Let me pull this up here. There is a book by Thomas Hardy. This will pull up here. No, not Thomas Hardy. This is George Eliot's Middlemarch. And there's a quote from it that was made into a movie a couple years ago called A Hidden Life. And it was a story about some guys during the Holocaust and saving people. And this line from Middlemarch, I'm going to give it to you. It says, "For the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts. And that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs." The good of the world isn't necessarily the celebrity pastor or the person I talked about on yesterday's show. These people, these are great stories. These are fun stories, sometimes tragic stories. But it is those, the good of the church is in large part because of those who lived faithfully hidden lives, who now lie in hidden tombs, the everyday person. And so, whenever I'm asked, hey, who would you want to hang out with or who's the most important? I think, boy, there are lots of good stories, but for every good story, there are these hidden lives. And those are the faithful ones that I like to celebrate.
Love it. You getting me all sentimental now. What you say is absolutely true. And you think about like how we get here, like you and I, being able to have a conversation like this it is because of men like Luther and Melanchthon, and you go down the line. And it is because of great American heroes too, and all that. But really, what you have, the unbroken line is an unbroken line of, the heroes, if you will. But it's an unbroken line of, like you said, the hidden lives, like the great men who weren't celebrated as such.
Uh-huh.
And we should celebrate those men, and we should be thankful for them. And yet we continue the study of like these great men, right? Why should ordinary men study the lives of the great men that came before them?
That's a great question. The first part of me wants to head back to that idea of seeing life steady and seeing it whole, that there's an element of the more of the story we can see and understand, the better we can figure out our place in it and where God has called us. By seeing the vocations, right? Good theological term, the vocations, the callings of other people, it enlarges what we might consider our own calling. You mentioned second career. I started this podcast in 2019 when I was 40 years old. Right. There are so many ways to serve God in his kingdom. And many of those are, having a family and paying the bills, or becoming a minister of the word and sacrament, or becoming a teacher. There are all sorts of ways, but there are ways you've not even thought of before. And I'm going to tell you the story of these saints who got a bee in their bonnet and said, hey, let's try this. And that might inspire you. So that's part of, it's just the more we can learn, the more we can see, not only the more gracious I think we become, because we see that there is diversity built into this and that we're not all doing it the same, but it also gives us models. We're all called to serve God, and how to do it can be tricky. So let's look at as many options as possible.
Yeah, love it. As we look at these models, what common characteristics or themes do you see? There aren't going to be any that encompass everybody, obviously, but what characteristics or themes do you see across the lives of these people?
Boy, a couple things. One is I always say, don't underestimate the place of charisma. Charisma obviously being a theological term, and to be charismated. But I'm talking about charisma in the sense of like, oh, that guy talk. I like hearing that guy talk. There are so many movements that are moved by charisma. I'm an ideas guy. A lot of us are ideas guys. And we think, oh, people follow so-and-so because they like their ideas. That is not often the case. People follow people because someone's charismatic. And so that doesn't make them right, but I think it's worth looking into. I think it's worth looking at that. So charisma is something I see. And then the second thing I would say is just a constancy, right? These people are, I'm reading and it's like, oh, it's there. And in his 11th year, writing the commentary on the book of John, he came across such and such. Or so-and-so who was a pastor but didn't get their first pastorate till they were 52, or write their first book until they were 60. Or, just when you look at history and you realize, oh no, they were a pastor there from 1574 to 1589, and we don't know anything about those 15 years because they were just quietly, constantly, consistently doing their work. And that seems to, and then after those sort of fallow periods, then we get these that's incredible moments. Then we get these, history worthy things. But it came because of a long consistency, a long sort of just doing the same thing over and over. And so I have to encourage myself with that sometimes, right? When I just think, oh, okay, next show, here we go. That the life of quiet consistency is often what God is glorified in and loves to see. And that's often where we do then ultimately see the fruits, even if we don't see the fruits ourselves. It's that which I think marks the greats.
Why do we chafe against that consistency?
Because we want it now. We want it fast. Right? I mean, that's the modern American way. Give it to me, give it to me fast. Let me microwave it. Give me a TikTok. Don't give me the Cliff's Notes. Ask AI to summarize the document. We're busy people. And so we, I don't know. I see things for weight loss all the time, right? And I'm a man who's often in the state of needing a little bit of weight loss. And, I see this like Ozempic stuff. And I'll tell you, I get sometimes I look at, I'm like, ooh, I got to get me some of that Ozempic. That's what I need. Or they're like, hey, did you know there's this new hot dog diet where you can do this and then use this machine and you'll lose 50 pounds. We all know how you lose weight. It's diet and exercise. It's diet and exercise. No one, that's what it is. But if I can give you a shortcut, even though I know that's not really the answer, our silly brains are hardwired to go that direction. So, yeah, we want it fast. We want it now. And the idea that it's just consistency over the long haul isn't as exciting, but I think it's true.
Maybe the answer you just gave is an answer to this question as well, but what are some things that we should consider reclaiming from the saints of the past, whether it's things like the work consistency and the quiet life, or like whatever, wherever you want to take that? What are some things that it would perhaps be wise for modern Christians to take up again, maybe that's been laid down from the saints who've come before us?
Boy, that's a great question. And my brain goes to a million different places because there's so many different contexts. I think there's a place for a quiet, disciplined opposition that the church in the past, when it hasn't been tied up with the emperor or tied up with the prince, the Christian life, the sacrificial life, the quiet life of sacrifice and humility as a kind of civil disobedience, as it were. The Christian activist I get really tired of, whether it's left or right or wherever, who's got this new political thing and this is really the issue and it's really this or it's really that. I like those Christians who just quietly and defiantly go about their way, and you'll learn what they're about. They don't need to go, protesting. Forget who said it, but there's a protest every Sunday with the body and blood of our Lord. And we just keep proclaiming that in opposition to all the ways of the world. That's something I wish we would get back from our past. And it's not always been our past because we do it bad sometimes, but sometimes our best is that sort of quiet obedience. And proclaiming the gospel. I also will say this: we are a people of the book. We are a people of the text, and I would love us to all redouble our efforts to become text people, to become word people. You don't need some professor to wag his finger at you to tell you to read more, but you know how I said we know that, what is it, diet and exercise is how you lose weight. You know how you gain wisdom? Reading. It's just and getting into that habit of reading scripture, of reading the great theologians, of reading great literature, of expanding your mind, of doing it in a way that is countercultural, because reading is slow. Reading isn't TikTok. Reading isn't YouTube. But it helps develop these habits that Christians have had that I think help us stay sane.
That's one of John Wooden's maxims, is drink deeply of good books, especially the Bible.
Yeah. We'll forgive him. He's a Bruin out here. We are in Trojan country, but it's fight on, and we'll allow for a Wooden quote.
I'm curious. You mentioned your love for sports and sports trivia and so forth. What crossovers have there been between your work on the Almanac, or just Christian history in general, church history in general, and the world of athletics and sports?
So I did a weekend edition, in the last probably couple months that went into this, that went into the sort of American sports and American religion, and the tie-in, the parallel between both of those, which is not always a good thing, right? Sports is a spectacle, and the church is not a spectacle, and sometimes it's borrowed from, and obviously celebrity culture. So yeah, there's it's fascinating. I mean, sports, I think today are such a part of the Christian's life that it's strange to see times where it was seen that sports were bad, that you didn't play sports. Um, and so that's always fun to see. I mean, one of my favorite stories is if you know Eugene Peterson, right? Eugene Peterson translated the Message, the sort of 1980s, 90s version of the Bible. Just this dear sort of evangelical pastor. And he lived in Montana, and he loved to play basketball and was in a very conservative church. And his friend's mom was very concerned that Eugene and her son were playing basketball. And should they play basketball, and shouldn't they be doing Awanas or Bible studies or something? And Eugene Peterson's mom says to this woman, I think it's okay for your son to play basketball. The mom says, all right, well, I'm sure Phil will be very happy that I'm going to let him play basketball with Eugene. Well, that Phil was Phil Jackson, who would go on to be one of, the greatest basketball coaches of all time, who was raised in this very sort of charismatic home in Montana where sports wasn't allowed. So you always see those sort of, things. I'm also fascinated by conversion stories, and American sports give us some of the biggest characters, and big characters tend to either die young or come to Jesus. And it's just something we see over and over. And so oftentimes with sporting figures, we get to see that too. So sports was my first love. I thought I was going to get into sports broadcasting. That was my world before I came to faith and then eventually got into history. But any parallel to sports I can make, I do. I love them.
Yeah. If you're in Trojan country, does that mean that you're a Dodger fan?
Oh, so the Dodgers are they're an evil institution. Whatever hatred the Yankees get, the Dodgers should get. They've got this fraud Japanese player. I forget his name already, but I am born and bred. Well, we were called the California Angels. Now we're the Los Angeles Angels, but I am because I'm in Orange County. So Orange County, Angels and Rams used to play at the same stadium 10 minutes from my house. So those are my teams.
Awesome. Yeah. So we can still be friends because I'm a Cubs fan.
Okay. All right.
And not always the biggest rivals with the Dodgers, but at the moment, oh boy.
Yeah.
We're gonna be butting heads with anybody wearing Dodgers gear for the foreseeable future here. Awesome. I'm also very curious about like the process that you mentioned, that you have your whole library or a large amount of your library online and everything. First of all, what are some of your favorite like biographers and so forth who've written on more of the church history subject, kind of in that realm, I guess?
Sure. It's funny. I always, as I've gotten older, I keep coming back to two authors that are Reformation era folk that I just enjoy reading the most. And it's ironic because these were two of my professors at the University of St. Andrews, and one was my main supervisor for my PhD, the other was an assistant. And so it feels weird like saying these guys years later that they've become my favorite, but it's Bruce Gordon, who wrote the book on Calvin. I think he wrote an even better book on Zwingli, God's Armed Prophet. His history of the Bible is phenomenal. The Swiss Reformation is great. And Bruce is he's a super smart guy that really knows how to write a good sentence, and anyone can read him. He doesn't feel like a professional historian when you're reading him. So Bruce, early modern guy, and then Andrew Pettigrew, good old Andrew. He wrote a book called Brand Luther, which came out for the sort of 500th anniversary.
Yeah.
Andrew is just a fantastic historian, clever, always makes you think, always kind of asks questions that kind of turn you on your ear. His book, he's done a number of works on the Reformation that kind of give you the global picture of the Reformation, not just Germany or not just England. So he's great. And then the third early modern name would be Dermot McCulloch. McCulloch has a huge book called Christianity, the First 3,000 Years. Now think about that. Hold on. First 3,000 years. Yeah, he gets into the sort of Second Temple Judaism in the background from a historical perspective. He's a historian, but he's also written some really good biographies. So yeah, those are sort of the three names that I tend to go to when it comes to Reformation stuff. So I'd recommend those. But I live a life in books, and I'm happy to do it. And I just live from one book to the next, from one footnote to the next. I've usually got one standard narrative that I'm reading kind of for fun. So I'll just pick something up and say, let's read on the Swiss, or let's read on the 8th century Franks. And then while I'm reading that, I've got a bunch of other things open that I'm kind of dancing around in. So,
yeah. What are your reliable sources? Like, generally speaking now, like, encyclopedias have kind of gone out of vogue. But what are your just general, like, I need a little information on this. What are your reliable resources that you use for quick references?
Encyclopedia Britannica. I have a subscription to it. I pay for the subscription. And if I need a quick date, I can go there. And that's something that is, most everything I do is going to be sourced a couple times. And so I'm never worried about, like, Wikipedia. I'll always go to Wikipedia. I'll always see what Wikipedia says. But I used to tell my students, Wikipedia is great to start, never end. Because you have nerds who are on the Wikipedia site who are like adding things. I mean, it's like, yeah, sometimes it's fantastic. It's a great place for people to say, oh, you need to know about this. And the more Wikipedia gives you links, okay, yeah, go there and link to it. So I do all that stuff, but Britannica tends to be my, okay, if everyone's arguing, was it October 8th or 9th? Okay, Britannica says 9th. I'm going to go with them because that's peer edited and reviewed. But yeah, usually two or three things at least I'm always checking just to make sure that I'm not being thrown off.
Yeah, I almost want to apologize for this question, but it is the topic of the moment, and it is relevant. How much do you use AI in the work that you do?
Great question. AI is really good at finding patterns in the way that Google does. I think the big study just came out and said it's not intelligence, it's just pattern finding. So if you would like it to find stuff, use it. Its computing speed and power is greater than anything you've ever had access to before. But because of that, if it's off a little bit in the beginning, it's going to be off a lot at the end. So you've got to be very wary of things getting wonky fast. So once again, I use an AI service. Like with Britannica, I use a paid service, right? So I pay a little bit extra. And what this company does is I use it like Google, and it gives me footnotes and tells me where to go. So I'll ask it, hey, find me this. Has anyone written on something on this? And yeah, sometimes it does a great job and it finds me something, but I never stay in there. I click on the thing and it sends me to the paper, and then I read the paper. So I would never let it write something for me. I would never say, like, write the story of Zacharias or Sinus or something. Because I find that AI prose is like AI imagery, where you just know it's off, right? You see that like weird, bubbly, 6-fingered carrot. You're like, that's not right. But yeah, let's hold on. I'm going to pull up right now, and I've got my Yeah, I'm looking for sources on so-and-so, the convert to Christianity, and then it gave me like 18 different links. So I was able to use that instead of Google, and it sent me into sources a lot faster. So, um, yeah, I'm almost hesitant to say, yes, I use AI, but like I use Google, and sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. It's a tool.
Yeah. One of my favorite prompts, probably my most used prompt I use ChatGPT, and this is more about my mission work or my evangelist work and not about my seminary work. I'm just going to say that out loud for
All
everybody.
right.
But this is more about my work as an evangelist. But how would a Lutheran or how would a confessional Lutheran explain, or how would a confessional Lutheran respond to this statement? And then I can think of like single digit times where I've just cut and pasted that answer. It's usually, oh, that's an interesting way to take that I wouldn't have thought of. And now we go and I make my own. It's a lot more useful for things like that.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. And to use with the human mind, fantastic. To
Mm-hmm.
use with actual intelligence, yeah. Give me 10 examples of such and such. Oh, fantastic. Okay. You're missing that. You're missing that. But I didn't think of that one. All right. Going to take that. So, yeah, it's every generation has to wrestle with, oh, how is this new technology going to ruin us? And there's going to be good and there's going to be bad, right? Here we are podcasting from across the United States, face to face. You know, it's not all bad.
Yeah. Well, and there's also our eschatology sobers us on some of those issues too. I think when we know how the world is going to end, we don't have to fear it.
Yeah,
And I know that the Lord is coming back. It's not going to be AI that ends the world. It's going to be the Lord, my Savior's return. And so, yeah, maybe this will get used and abused, and even some bad things will happen. But I know how it's all going to end ultimately. There's nothing to fear. Everything's going to be okay.
Hey, there you go. I've heard that before.
There we go. All right. Last big questions, and these are big questions. I know. So answer them as you can, and just as it comes to your mind, because I didn't prep you on these either. You're a man who is just steeped in church history all the time, right? You've got a vast working knowledge of what has come, how the Lord has worked in times past. What are your biggest? Well, let's do them one at a time. What's your biggest concern for the Christian church at large, moving into the future as we head into the rest of the 21st century?
What's my concern? Boy, there's a place in which I don't have a concern when it comes to the big picture. When it comes to the American church, I'm very concerned. When it comes to the American church and her, the way it broadly she's gotten into bed with politics, the way that she's broadly got involved with influencers and social media, and this is. I'm whenever I take people on tours is one of the things I get to do. So I do a tour of Germany and a tour of Switzerland once or twice a year, Reformation tour. And I was just talking with someone yesterday about it, and they were talking about how sad it is to walk around these places and to see these beautiful churches empty. And I said, well, that was 100 years ago. That's what's happening in America. Our churches are going to empty. The church history has a way. Let's see. In 1910, let me get this number right. I'll give you ballpark numbers. In like 1910, a majority of Christians lived in Western Europe and North America. Now that is not the case at all. A majority of Christians now live south of the equator. The church, the center of the church moves, and it's painful for the places it leaves, and it's leaving us now. So what that does, what that means for Western culture, what that means for American culture, I don't think it's a good thing. I think we are in a period of decadence, of falling down, but I think we're going to see the church rise in the East. And I think the numbers we're seeing is that in the next century, it's going to be China and India that are the places that have the most faithful Christians. And they're going to be tourists to America walking around saying, oh, that's so sad that that big, beautiful church is now a Walgreens or a coffee shop. But that's kind of how it goes. So am I bummed about it for us? Yes. Am I scared for the church on the whole? No. Jesus got it.
Now, these answers are probably going to melt together a little bit. I can guess what you're, maybe not,
Okay.
but I can probably guess where you're going to go with this one. What do you anticipate with joy about the future of the church? What are you looking forward to or hoping for the future? What are you excited about as far as the church? Let's go with the American church again.
We have the opportunity to reclaim our roots. We're going to have the opportunity to have it all fall apart and to say, oh man, what's worth salvaging? And the history of God's people throughout time and space is getting too big for their britches, of collapsing, of having to say, oh man, what are we supposed to salvage? And God, in his goodness, always has a remnant that says, it's the good news. It's the good news. That's what we salvage. And churches are going to do that. And Christians are going to do that. And even though it's going to take a fall, I do think there is, joy in the morning as it is. And as we are painfully pruned in a way of things that we thought were our birthright, relevancy and the like, there'll be a rediscovery of the good news. And that's, I delight in seeing that throughout church history.
Awesome. You make a compelling case for raising children strong in the faith who will be left standing when it all crumbles down.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But
Awesome.
that's always the case. There's always a remnant. There's always a remnant. And so if we're true to that, then we don't have to worry about, crumbling infrastructure or whatever. It doesn't mean that it won't hurt and that we don't do our best to help people, but it just means our hope is in something a lot more solid.
All right. Awesome. I very much appreciate your time, Dan. They say never meet your heroes, right? Well, in the podcast world, it's never meet your favorite voice, but your voice was just as wonderful and insightful in person as it is in the early hours of the morning. So I appreciate your time very, very much. Love having you on. Thank you for sharing your insights. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you very, very much for it.
All right.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen who are listening, God bless you. We're very happy that you are here. Please do consider contributing to the work that we do by going down in the show notes below, clicking on the cup of coffee donation and making a donation there. If you have any suggestions for future guests and things like that, we welcome that as well. Go to the website. You can reach out to me there. We love you all. God bless you, and we'll see you next week.